Even without lockdown, there's something quite otherworldly about the idea of being in a dark room in the middle of the night, dancing with a load of strangers, bending our circadian rhythms to reach some other place. When we start coming out from our homes, no one knows what the new landscape is going to look like. Businesses of all kinds are emerging into a world where existing problems are even more exacerbated. And in Berlin, the challenges already facing its famed club culture are so big, there's even a word for it. Clubsterben, meaning dying clubs.
Just got off the U-Bahn at Strausberger Platz. You can hear the platforms pretty quiet this time of night. It's 1 a.m. and we are just on our way out because nobody goes out before about 1 a.m. in Berlin.
For DJs like me, playing Berlin is a rite of passage. If you've been to Berlin's clubs, you'll know. If you haven't, stick with me, you'll be fine.
You just get a really kicking sound.
Berlin's nightlife exists in dark, concrete rooms, in a fiercely joyous reclamation of buildings that used to be everything from swimming pools to dog food factories to an entire apartment block. You can wear jeans and a t-shirt or a leather harness. It doesn't matter.
15 people went on the dance floor and started taking off their clothes completely.
For the hours you're inside, you're totally free to be who you want.
I like Beate Uwe, which has a carpet and you can go in without shoes.
Suspended in the present tense.
You can think different, you can develop completely new ideas, you can feel free.
But even in the last year, since I first started working on this programme, something's shifted. There's been a rapid escalation in the number of clubs being forced to relocate or shut down. I want to find out what the future holds and what's at stake. And where better to start than one of Berlin's most respected techno clubs?
Hey, we're downstairs outside the venue.
The iconic Tresor is situated inside an enormous power plant.
Hi, I'm Emily.
Its founder is Dimitri Hagemann, who meets me inside.
You know, I'm a space explorer and I found this space. But it was made in the very early 60s when the wall was made, in 61 or so. Same concrete.
The building is cold, industrial and absolutely massive.
Can I make a noise in here for the echo? Because I think the delay on it is so amazing.
Yeah.
Now your turn.
Oh no, okay.
In the old control room, surrounded by racks, buttons, switches and dials that still remain from the building's old life, Dimitri and I sat down for a chat. As a teenager in the 70s, growing up in a small town in West Germany, he always dreamed of putting on concerts and gigs.
I was inspired by Woodstock, for instance, you know. The peace idea, community idea, the green idea, you know. So I wanted to bring this idea to my small village, 700 inhabitants. But the only result what I got was no, doesn't work. Most of these people I met later in the same story, you know, they heard too many times, no.
So Dimitri moved to West Berlin.
Everybody had great ideas, we wanted to change the world, we were young, 22 or so, you know, and then everybody had a dream, but we had no space. And then the day came, you know, and when the wall came down, that was our moment. Everywhere empty spaces and no policemen, you know. It was a yes for the first time for me, you know. So it was not like in the countryside, the no, it was yes, do something, go for it. You know.
Was it a yes or was it a like no one's saying no and there's all this space available? Did you feel like you even needed to ask permission for anything?
No, we were waiting so long, you know, we were hungry. But you are right, it was not like that somebody says go for it, but we did. Because there was no laws, no authorities, and Berlin has not had a curfew. Since 70 years, no curfew. The most important thing was a party, you know.
The energy in the city was electric. Its reputation started to attract international artists, including DJs from Detroit who brought their music with them.
Boom, techno came in. Hanging out in dark basements, in dark rooms, with a lot of smoke, you know. For many, the first time they danced through the night. Couldn't stop it, you know. In these night sessions we met and we exchanged ideas and we changed the world. 1,000 times every night.
We're right on an intersection by Ostbahnhof.
It's 1:30 a.m. and the night is young. We're headed to Yam, a reggae club located on the banks of the River Spree.
I love that sound when you're close enough to a club to know there's something happening inside, but you can't quite make out what the music is yet.
You obviously won't be able to feel the bass, but it's coming right up through my feet and into my chest. There's still room to dance, which is nice, so people are just chilling, getting a drink, starting to kind of move a little bit, but I feel like they're holding back for later still.
I arrived in Berlin in the mid-90s.
Geoff Vasseur is Yam's general manager.
I was 19, and there were chickens on the street and sheep and stuff, and a lot of squats. I suddenly realized that it was possible to make a change in this city.
What kind of change did you feel like you could make, and how does the club scene fit into that change?
You could have a direct impact by just taking spaces.
This building was once used by the Nazis as a military car park. Round the back, there's a huge garden with a sound system, and there's a piece of Cold War history slicing right through it.
What does it mean to you personally to be running a club with part of the Berlin Wall running through it?
Regarding your own understanding of freedom, it's an important symbol. It's also a bit of a moral duty to keep it and to keep doing something nice out of this place that is bringing people together instead of tearing them apart.
But more recently, there's something else that has come to characterise Berlin.
Do you want to just tell us what that noise is in the background?
This is the construction site for a new hotel. So this is a typical development in this city.
Gentrification isn't limited to Berlin, but how the city has been registering its once empty spaces presents a unique challenge.
For this area, which belongs to the city, there was no authorization whatsoever, and the city still rented it to us.
For decades, Berlin's attitude to nightlife has been to leave it alone, not to ask too many questions about what the space is used for.
The city has been sold out, basically, in the 90s. Because the city was broke and they needed money and they had all this land and they just sold it out. So all the spaces were never free since the 90s. This is like a myth. This whole club scene was built on the idea that spaces were temporary.
Yeah.
And it was never a problem because there were enough of them. And now the spaces get less, so the idea of temporary spaces get problematic. And all of a sudden you start wondering like, okay, so I'm here to stay, so I need regulation. And that's what's happening.
For Yam, being suddenly forced to repair a building which until recently wasn't even acknowledged by the city has meant finding hundreds of thousands of euros, and quickly, which isn't easy for any venue with low profit margins. But what makes Berlin's club culture so distinct, and what I'm so interested in, is how they're responding to this challenge. Not just by fighting the state and developers, but finding ways to work with them.
Shall I check? We're outside Gretchen.
Southwest of Yam, in Kreuzberg, is Gretchen,
Door that's about to be
a
open.
club run by Pamela Schobus, who is more than familiar with the problems Geoff describes.
If you, the club, are on a spot and then someone else builds something next to it, this one who's new has to protect the one which has been there before. I think it's just fair, isn't it?
Pamela is the current chair of the Berlin Club Commission, a network of club owners and promoters representing 9,000 people lobbying politicians on issues of gentrification. Aside from notable exceptions, legendary club Berghain, for example, pays the same tax as the Opera House. Most of Berlin's clubs are grouped with casinos, sex cinemas and discos, something Pamela wants to change.
The DJ sets we do is something completely different that you have in a discotheque. In the discotheque, you have a person who plays there every Saturday from the beginning to the end. And earlier it was like they had a cupboard with a lot of CDs inside, and everyone just took the same CDs and they were bored, I don't know, in a supermarket. So that's something completely different to what we are doing in clubs. I mean, we book artists from all over the world, so we pay a much higher fee. They play 90 minutes and they mix the records. You cannot compare that. So this is why we try to change that we become cultural institutions.
Because cultural institutions enjoy more protection against new developments.
If there's someone coming and wants to build very expensive flats, if there is a cultural institution, they can say to the landlord, we have to save that. So if you want to build your new flats, you can do that, but you have to be more far away. You have to put the bathroom to the side where the club is and not the living room or something like that. This is what we are fighting for.
I see the rave or the club as an art form. I really do.
In a pop-up noodle bar in Neukölln, we meet Luz Diaz, co-founder of queer, femme and non-binary forward collective Room for Resistance.
A DJ is not everything, really. It's just a very small part. It's the scenography, the lights, the atmosphere, the people, the crowd, feeling good. That's a huge part. It's like for me, as a person who can be very anxious, I need to reach this point where I'm gonna feel I can let go, and that's hard. You have to work hard to bring me there. One of my favorite party and one of the favorite party I think I've curated was with Teto Preto. Teto is a queer band from Brazil. The vibe was really bonkers. It just went on and on, dancing wild.
When you DJ, you basically live for moments like that, and you can't. It's impossible to describe it with words, but basically you just suddenly the energy changes in the room and you just feel it.
Yeah, I think that's what is beautiful about it, is you can't recreate it. That's probably why the rave is, or the clubbing is so powerful.
You start at a private home and you have a pre-party.
Meanwhile, in Berlin State Parliament,
You drink a beer or champagne, whatever you like.
Georg Kussler, Berlin's Green Party representative for climate change and club culture.
And then you try to get on a guest list in your favorite club. You're calling people. And if you're lucky, you get on the guest list, and otherwise you spend 2 hours in a queue. But that's part of the game somehow. Once you're in, you always meet new friends and old friends alike. It's going to be a big blast. And the nice thing about Berlin is actually waiting until it's bright outside, the sun comes up, and there comes a point and you have to decide if you go home or if you just carry on. And you just look at each other and you know what's happening. Feeling of acceptance within the story. And that's just what makes Berlin so lovable.
Club culture here has flourished, in part because the government has always seemed to value, or at least tolerate, its nightlife. Hardly surprising given that in 2018 alone it brought in 1.5 billion euros to the city's economy. But as the city becomes more crowded, that laissez-faire approach is giving way to more state involvement.
For the first time, taxpayers' money and state funds are going towards the clubs. We have over 1 million euro made available for clubs to invest in noise reduction measures like new doors or new windows to protect them. But it's a really hard fight. Most clubs are not on public land, but on private land.
Do you think that there's a way that there will ever be clubs on public land and then they can be protected?
That's what we're trying. Some spaces in the city where schools are planned, now I'm going to approach local politicians, say, hey, maybe you can combine that with a club, because time for school, time for club usually is different.
Doesn't that mean that the club would have to close at like 7 a.m?
Yes, certain parties would have to close Monday morning at 7, which is quite early for Berlin.
Very early for Berlin. It's 3:30 a.m. and we're outside Tresor, the huge power plant we were at earlier.
The idea of freedom is very important here, so there's a sign even outside, like opposite the queue, saying no photos. They don't even want you to photograph other people in the queue. So they were very wary about letting us record even audio. Must be 1,000 people in there, and the buildings just kind of soak them up like it's nothing. You just walk into the club and there's just no light, and it's so atmospheric and intense.
It's difficult to put into words how important club culture is here in Berlin. And if it's hard to put into words, it's even harder for politicians like Georg to put into policy. Which is why last year the Club Commission released a study attempting to quantify the cultural and economic value of club culture, highlighting figures such as how club turnover was €168 million in 2018, and how 98% of those asked saw clubs as a cultural asset to the city.
We did these studies because we just figured out that it's a little bit difficult just to talk about it.
Pamela Schubis.
We needed a proof.
It was really interesting for me reading it because I know this stuff about clubs. Like, I've been going out clubbing for years, so I kind of know it inherently in myself, but it was so interesting reading that reflected back in this really academic language. Now it's official because it's in a paper.
Yeah, that's it. This is why we did it.
Yeah.
So that people believe.
Do you feel like since you've done the report, things have changed for the club community as a result of that report?
Yes. They can work with the numbers. It's a little bit difficult because for myself, and I think it's the same for a lot of club owners, for me, the cultural perspective is the much more important one than the business. But on a political basis, I think the business part, so how much money do we bring to the city, that gives them a reason to fight for us.
And when she can, she takes them on a night out to give them the full cultural experience.
It's really funny, but honestly, whenever I come in here with a politician, they come inside and the first thing they say, oh, it's so clean in here.
How rude.
Yes, isn't it? When they mentioned that the first time, I was just like, I even couldn't answer because at the first time I thought, hey, what do they mean? I don't know what they are talking about. And then I realized they really meant what they said. They obviously expected it completely dirty. I mean, it's really rude. I think it's disrespectful.
Berlin's clubs are in buildings layered with history. Tresor in a power plant made from the same concrete as the wall. Afrocentric Yam in a former Nazi car park. Gretchen is in a stables dating back to the 1800s. And the next place we're visiting, wow.
What on earth is this place? It's massive.
Yeah, it's quite famous. So right now we're at Metropol, which is actually, I think it's the oldest club of Berlin.
Metropol, all gold pillars and winding staircases, encapsulates Berlin's nightlife like nothing else. Located in Schöneberg, the heart of the city's gay scene back in the 1920s, it was a theatre in the 20s and 30s, hosted Brecht's Threepenny Opera in the 50s, became a porn cinema, and in 1978 it opened as the city's answer to Studio 54. Now, it's where producer and promoter Aziz Sarr hosts his night, Freak de l'Afrique, specialising in Afro house and Afro beats.
I mean, when we started our parties, we always put hip-hop on the flyer and different genres to really get the people from everywhere. But now we realize it's not even necessary anymore. You can just like play African music straight from start to finish.
You're a producer. Can you describe for us the change that happens when you play music in a club space?
Yeah, of course. I mean, playing your sound in the club, that's the main thing actually. Of course, it's nice to hear it in the radio. But the main thing why I would do music is to get people to dance.
So it's almost like the track's not finished until it's performed.
Yeah, of course. That's when it's when the final piece is done, that people dance to it. Yeah.
Aziz is also part of the Rise collective, who mix Afro house with techno.
Berlin is now really the capital of house techno music, but it has been very whitewashed. Sure. Most people don't even know that house and techno is a black music. They don't know that. So I kind of want to bring it back to those roots. Once they hear some African beats over a techno beat, then it makes it easier for them.
And you're here with another DJ. Would you like to explain who you're here with?
Yeah, I'm here with my father, the legendary DJ Jimmy Bamba, who was quite iconic from the 1980s.
Oh, he's speaking good, my son. And I hear as he's speaking, I'm look like the old man. But it's very interesting to see him playing, because in my time it was not African music. Berlin was no black people here before. Was the only black people was the GI, American military. But slowly I tried with the African music to mix that with the punk music, with rock and roll, And you see how the punk beginning to dance Afrobeat, something like that, or the Fela Kuti. And that was interesting for me to see slowly, how the movement is changing.
When the Metropole reopened again, after it was closed for a few years, once we saw it's going to open, we were like, okay, we have to bring Afrobeats into Metropole. We have to. And luckily, because this has so much history, it would be like a nice message from the black community, from the older generation would love it, that finally their music is in Metropole.
One way. I see him like a DJ, and I was very, very happy and very proud. That is really what I was not waiting for. That was some kind of a dream, but now it's reality.
Yeah, and I played a song which I thought would connect everybody, and I played the famous Kasaf.
I was proud. Yes, my son. Yeah. Everybody fall and good, vibration and all. I say yes, make me happy.
For music to keep developing and growing, you need space for experimentation, and that doesn't always come from selling the most tickets. Some of the most exciting nights I've been to have been in half-empty rooms, and a year or so later, you hear that sound everywhere. Back in the Noodle pop-up, with Room for Resistance co-founder Luz.
We wanted to have a platform to experiment with music, and so to be adventurous, and we felt that the music was very conformist in Berlin in general. You would just hear minimal techno or minimal house. No offense, but that was not what we were looking for.
But as rising rents put pressure on clubs to sell more tickets, which often means more mainstream lineups, the fact that some clubs have become so prestigious adds another kind of pressure for up-and-coming DJs.
It would make people play safer and safer and safer. For artists, it becomes harder to feel free to explore and experiment, because when you experiment, you can make mistakes. What we care about is that people take risks. That leads to often amazing moments and brilliance to happen, but it also leads to mistakes to happen, and it's fine. It's like everything is so bleak right now, but then if you have an experience of a night out that's about connection, connectiveness, togetherness, then you can go out in the world and then, okay, we're going to keep doing the work we do, and we believe into this. We believe into fighting for these values that we shared on that dance floor.
What's the perfect way for you that the state could support club culture in Berlin?
Not caring about it. Berlin is the only city left with this kind of freedom.
Berlin clubs are as closely tied with collective freedom as they are individual expression. And for some in Berlin's club scene, that means not wanting to take money from the state at all.
Hi, I'm Rosa Rave. Hi, I'm also Rosa Rave.
Rosa Rave, both of them, are spokespeople for Reclaim Club Culture, who extend that collective spirit beyond the night.
For Reclaim Club Culture, we are more on the side of not addressing the state.
We caught up with them on the phone.
We want to be more free in what we think and what we want to address and how we want to address it. It's important. The production of culture is not only a service to people in terms of playing music and providing a space where people have fun. Culture is a huge part of society. So by producing a part of culture, we are also producing political aspects of society. We are not only cultural actors, but also political actors.
In 2018, 70,000 people gathered on the streets of Berlin to protest against the far-right party AfD, mobilised by Reclaim Club Culture.
We try to take our work within society and the production of culture as a starting point to not only question how society works, but also how it can be changed.
Do you think it's possible to maintain counterculture whilst simultaneously working with the state?
Yes.
Green Party representative Georg Kössler.
And right now we see a connection between club culture and the fight for spaces with the fight for affordable rents and the fight against climate change. They meet and they have demonstrations together. So there's an intersectionality between the struggles in the city, which gives it more power. And I'm actually quite optimistic when it comes to counterculture in Berlin, because somehow it belongs to the city. As long as there will be an empty spot somewhere in the city, people will make a club out of it and counterculture will develop.
And there's a lot of empty space outside of Berlin. For Tresor founder Dimitri Hagemann, who's been witness to Berlin's club culture since the 90s, it's not just about preservation, it's also about finding ways to replicate the best of that creativity and freedom outside the city.
Berlin is fully booked with creative people. What is very sad, if there's nothing like a space where young people can meet in a small city, they move to Berlin and then they have to realize, oh, I don't find the job. I wanted to change the world and what can I do? In Berlin is no job.
Berlin's ecology comes from a combination of physical space and a chance for young people to use that space in their own way. And that's something that could work elsewhere.
And this is what I'm doing with the Happy Locals project, that I tell them, decision makers, the mayors, this is all supermarket for the young kids. Otherwise, the cool kids move away, move to Berlin. And then you have this vacuum and a right-wing mainstream takes it over. You know, you better to keep them here in your city and you will need them, then they do something. Everybody who builds a house stays, you know, and then they stay. That's very important.
So in an ideal world, if Happy Locals took off in different towns, what would that mean for Berlin?
Berlin can give this experience, what they have created, you know, to other cities. Give young people space. I'd say yes.
It's easy to romanticise Berlin as some kind of utopia, which could never happen anywhere else. I don't think that's the case. We need to make space where people can gather in dark rooms, let go of inhibitions, surrounded by people they might not know. And that's worth fighting for. Berlin's Nightlife was presented by me, Emily Dust. The producer was Georgia Catt.